The power of 10x thinking begins with the belief that it is possible. And that is the premise in all 10x thinking, that it is possible and in fact inevitable that over time a given goal will be 10 times more possible, 10 times, if you have a computer, for example, that in time it will be 10 times more potent and faster. If you have a company, that whether it's yours or somebody else's, there will be a 10 times more efficient company. And so this belief opens up a framework of thinking that over time leads to a dramatic change in strategy. And its power is that when you set out to do something 10 times better, for example, to 10x your life, if you want to take your present life and have it generate 10 times more well-being for yourself and other people, for example. It's a wonderful aspiration. And the premise is that it is possible. Now, the strategy for having a 10 times more potent life at creating well-being is going to be very different than the current strategy. And so that's the opening that it provides. And as just one example of 10x thinking, YouTube, where I first heard, it's Dan Sullivan talk about this theory of 10x thinking. I'd never heard of it before. And it crossed my mind, as I was scanning through YouTube videos, 10x thinking, what an interesting idea. And click. And I'm in Thailand, Dan's in the US, I'm several years after the speech, and yet the idea is blossoming in my mind. And this idea of liberating the speaker from the listener in both location and time is a 10x technology. Because there were, maybe 80 people in the room, something like that, when Dan was giving his talk. But there may be millions touched by this idea over time. And so how do you get from 80 people to millions? You see, the thought process between 10x thinking is that you wouldn't go about giving lots more talks. Meaning Dan could give 1,000 talks, which is quite unreasonable. But he could give the same talk 1,000 times to 80 people each, and he would have reached 80,000 people. Or he can record the conversation, and now it's reaching hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And so this is a 10x strategy, how to leverage something. And so anything that's important to me at this point, I run through a 10x paradigm. How could a relationship, how could my marriage be 10 times more fulfilling, growth-oriented, meaningful, etc. than it is? How could my life be 10 times more potent and valuable to me? How could the nonprofit that I start be 10 times more potent per unit of time, per unit of money, per unit of natural resources than any nonprofit on the planet? And so you start with a baseline of the status quo. You imagine what 10x looks like. So if you're making $100,000 a year and you're 10xing your income, that looks like $1 million. But you're not going to get from $100,000 to $1 million a year by driving 10 times faster on the highway. You're not going to get there by walking 10 times faster, by making 10 times more phone calls. Instead, there's going to be a completely new way of going about it. And that's the power of 10x thinking. The subtitle of Dan's talk was, why 10x is easier than 2x. Because if you think about doubling your productivity, for example, the default way of thinking is to just simply do it faster. If we work really hard, we'll get the same system that's producing this result to produce twice the result. We'll just all work twice as hard, which is, of course, exhausting. And you can pull it off. You can double something. You can get it 20% better, 30% better just by working harder. But you can never get 1,000% better by working harder, by working faster. And so you have to redesign the whole system. And so this is the power. And it's my belief that this paradigm is one of the most potent transformational paradigms that we have available to us as a species to, number one, use the 80-20 principle to isolate and focus on those areas in human existence that deliver 80% of the gold. What's gold? Human well-being, sustainable human well-being. To identify those areas that create sustainable human well-being and then apply a 10x paradigm and reconfigure things with the goal of 1,000% improvement.